So very good morning to all of you. Today we'll be starting with medieval India. I hope ancient is clear. ठीक है, practice किया test में? Okay. Because eventually the most important thing is to write down answers. Okay. So if we talk about medieval India, just like ancient India, will cover certain important debates, perspectives of historians. Then we go towards sources. The number of sources that we have in medieval India, yes, the number of sources are more. Okay, there we had less resources and more debates, and it's the other way around in medieval India. Then we'll also focus on some important topics. Plus, in every class, we'll do one or two topic of art and architecture. There are hardly 7 to 8 topics of art and architecture which we have shared today itself. All of you have the notes? Okay. So this much art and architecture is expected from you by UPSC. Let us see the debates once. Let us see the debates. So one is with respect to historiography of Bhakti movement. All of you need to understand how Bhakti started, what is the perspective. Then comes a debate on feudalism. You need to understand this also. Last year they asked a very straightforward question. Monetary anemia or paucity of coinage during early medieval period. Nature of Chola state. Debate on the origin of Rajput. This is a topic mentioned in your syllabus. Urbanization and nature of medieval towns. Then we have a decline of Mughals. Every year we get one question from decline of Mughals. कभी जागीरदारी क्राइसिस, कभी कोई क्राइसिस, वही 3-4 इसके आपके कॉजेज हैं. एट टाइम्स इट्स दी lack of preparedness of army, and last comes the rise of Marathas. So these are the important debates which we need to cover. Okay, and if you see art and architecture handout, so in art and architecture handout you'll see we have Sultanate architecture. Okay, then we have Mughal architecture. In both of them you need to understand the transitory phase. How during the Sultanate period we see the evolution of architecture, similarly under Mughals. Okay, after that we have Mughal paintings. Among Mughal paintings the most important thing for us would be Jahangir. Okay, and the influence of other paintings on Mughal paintings. Then it comes to the regional architecture. UPSC is not asking that much. In 2015 they asked from Kashmir. Okay, then they can even ask about Bengal, Deccan, Gujarat, as well as Mandu. So we are going to cover all this. Okay, mainstream architecture as well as the regional architecture. Both kind of art and architecture will cover. So this would be the art and architecture. हर क्लास में एक दो करते चलेंगे because एक साथ करने में थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा टाइम लगता है. Let us start with today's debate. Okay. So first debate that we have in front of us, the historiography of Bhakti movement. Look, this question was asked by UPSC in 2013. Okay, so some of your previous year question will get addressed along with the class itself. So give me the reasoning. Do you know anything about this? What is the meaning of historiography? The various viewpoints. Okay, so there are a lot of viewpoints with respect to origin of Bhakti movement. Majority of the scholars, they link it to the coming of Islam. Alright, so what is your opinion? Why the Bhakti movement started during the 14th-15th century?
Foreign religion. The second perspective is it is within our reform, social reform, within Hinduism.
Look, one question is the origin of Bhakti movement, in which your point is valid, right? If we start from post-Vedic periods, many elements of Bhakti movement started from that period itself. But the organized form of Bhakti movement, it started from South India. All of us know about this, Alvar and Nayanars. Okay, they started under the Pallavas, and then eventually with the period of time it came towards North India. Ramananda played a very important role in bringing the bhakti from south to North India. That is more or less about the origin. When we talk about historiography, historiography can be on any aspect of bhakti movement. It will not be only on the origin. Okay, any aspect means why they went for egalitarianism or equal kind of society, why they wanted that. That can be one aspect. Okay, so there can be multiple aspects. So we need to understand the viewpoints of historians on the bhakti movement. That is one. Now, when we just talk about origin, so इसको एक बार note down कर लो, because origin is not mentioned in your handouts. वहीं पे एक जगह छोटा सा mention कर लो. So certain elements of bhakti, they can even be linked to Vedas and more prominently to the Upanishads. Like all of us know, Upanishads focus on knowledge. They did not give much importance to rituals. Okay, similar thing was that with the Bhakti. Bhakti did not give a lot of emphasis on rituals. Okay, but there was one fundamental difference also. Here the more important part was devotion. Surrender to the Supreme God. Okay, so that is one difference, but the elements of rejecting the rituals, that started from Upanishad itself. Okay, so it is not so that the idea of bhakti was new altogether. It's not like that. Certain elements of bhakti, they can be seen in Indian culture from the beginning itself. Okay, is it clear? So when we talk about origin, you are going to say certain elements of bhakti can be found from Vedic as well as Upanishad itself. Then if we talk about the organized form, they were starting off Alvars and Nayanars. In short, bhakti related to Vishnu and Shiva. So this started in South India, and to be more precise, in Tamil Nadu. This strengthened during 8th to 10th century. Okay, you need to remember this, because when you write the points down, अगर ये पूछा भी नहीं है, then also you can make a chart. Suppose if they ask just about the historiography of Bhakti movement, then also you can write about this in brief. Okay, because these are relevant aspect of origin of Bhakti movement. Is it clear? Note it down. Then, what difference happened in 13th century in North India that it led to rise of Bhakti? Can you think of any important change? Coming of Turks. Okay, Sufism. But let us try to explore the relationship between polity and religion. So before them, we had Rajputs. Yes. That is one thing which I wanted to hear. So in North India, there was alliance of Rajputs and Brahmanas. All of us understand this, that religion is required by the political class to justify the rule. Okay, so Rajputs required, यार इनको जो dynasties के वो titles मिल रहे थे, सूर्यवंशी, चंद्रवंशी, who gave them? Brahmanas. Okay, so for legitimacy purpose, Rajputs were dependent upon Brahmanas, and this Bhakti movement, it was cutting at the very root of the dominance of Brahmanas. So Rajputs will not give any kind of promotion to such scheme which can affect the status of Brahmanas, because that would eventually affect their own political status. Is it clear? Because of these reasons, Bhakti movement had to start from South India rather than North India. Okay, so when the rule was replaced by the Turks, space became open. Now there was no political class which were giving direct patronage to Brahmanas. Okay, so space became open, and that's why Bhakti movement came to North India from South India. Okay, so while coming to South India, there's certain states which are famous for this. One is Tamil Nadu. So the birth would be in Tamil Nadu. But the maturing phase comes in Karnataka. All of us know about Bhaswana. Okay, so he was the prime minister. All right, he was the prime minister of those time, and he actively took part in the Bhakti movement. Okay, so it starts from Tamil Nadu, then it comes towards Karnataka. From here it comes towards Maharashtra, and eventually comes to North India. This is how it is, and it grew old in Gujarat. The last place where the Bhakti movement became prominent was Gujarat. This question was asked by UPSC in 2018. That Bhakti movement took birth in Tamil Nadu, then mature in Karnataka, then comes to Maharashtra, and eventually it became old in Gujarat. Okay, so this is one sequence which you need to remember. Okay, and you can very well write it in your answer. This can be an X factor in your answer when it comes to Bhakti movement. Is it clear? There are two things which we have discussed. One, the origin of Bhakti movement. So is it clear now? Certain elements of Bhakti can be seen from ancient India, our authoritative text of, or even the Shruti tradition. Alright, then eventually we can talk about the development of Bhakti in the South India. From South India, with the period of time, it came towards North. There was change in the political situation which provided more space for the new religious forces to emerge, and Bhakti was related to this. One saint has played an important role in bringing Bhakti movement to North India, and his name is Ramananda. Okay, remember his name. He was the one who went to South India and brought the important postulates of Bhakti movement towards North India. Majority of the important philosophers or the important Bhakti saints like Kabir, etc., they were his students. Okay, is it clear? So that's why Ramananda played an important role. So if UPSC asks you any question, what factors were responsible for the rise of Bhakti movement? What factors were responsible? So we'll look into the historical tradition itself, Smriti books. Okay, we'll look into the role of Alvar and Nayanar, which increased their influence. Then we'll look into the influence of saints like Ramananda, who became the ambassadors, and we'll also look into the role of the change in the political situation in North India. Is it clear? All these factors were responsible for the rise of Bhakti movement. Other than which we already know that there was a lot of problem in our society with respect to dominance of Brahmana, caste system, etc. That is something else. But eventually these were the main important factors. And yes, with the period of time, a challenge also came in the form of Islam. Islam was having equality, brotherhood. There were no divisions like the Hindu society. That's why it became pertinent to reform our own religion. And Bhakti movements, certain ideas, they were borrowed from Islam. Is it clear? The topic is clear? Any kind of question comes, I hope you will be able to tackle it. You can remember the name of few important scholars or the saints who were part of the Bhakti movement. Now let us come to the historiography. North Indian Turks replaced all the Rajputs. That's why the Brahmana and Rajput alliance, which were ruling over North India, that got disassociated. So it became easy for the religious class or the counter currents to emerge. Okay, if suppose there is dominance of someone and that power is taken away from them, तो easy हो जाएगा ना. महाराष्ट्र का एग्जांपल देख लो. महाराष्ट्र का एग्जांपल देखो. Political class dissociate हुआ. Now there is room for others to emerge. Okay, similarly. Just read quickly the various perspectives, because if a direct question comes on the historiography of Bhakti movement, you have to remember at least 5 historians. At least 5 historians you have to remember. आगे की तरफ ज्यादा हो गया, नींद आ गई। भक्ति में लीन हो गया। पढ़ो, आगे पढ़ो ना। हर चीज में थोड़ी थोड़ी बारीकी है, ऐसा नहीं कि सब वही बोल रहे हैं। तभी तो बोल रहा हूँ, जीएस हिस्ट्री और ऑप्शनल हिस्ट्री में दिस इज द ओनली डिफरेंस ना। आपको बारीकी से बताना पड़ेगा। यू हैव टू सी द नुआंसेस। इफ समबडी सेइंग इट वाज इंडिविजुअल सेंटिमेंट इन 13th century and during the 14th century came under the influence of Islam, that is different from it started only because of Islam. This is the difference. Or R.G. Bhandarkar is saying it was indigenous in nature, and the most accepted view is it is indigenous in nature, which I have already explained you. ठीक है, हमें बस व्यू पॉइंट्स याद करने हैं। whenever there are we have to write historiography, it's not about right or wrong. If they ask you to critically examine them, then you have to analyze that viewpoint, but until then it's all about just writing down the viewpoints of historians. Okay, that's how it is. Good morning all the online students. So if we see the first perspective, it is from R.G. Bhandarkar. Okay, he is a nationalist historian. All of us know about that. So what is expected from a nationalist historian? Indigenous, right? So कभी कभार जैसे याद ना हो तो आंख बंद करके ये भी कहते हो, nationalist तो always say that it is indigenous. Okay, this is one point of view. So he said he was the first historian to work. This is one thing you need to remember. Okay, so he showed the movement as indigenous in character. Second, he gave the literary and epigraphic evidence like the antiquities of Krishna worship. You need to remember the source that he is using for coming up with his arguments. All right. On the other, when we have the second view, Zainer's view, he said that this was inspired by Islam. Okay, he justified his views by egalitarian message of bhakti like Islam and equating the idea of personal worship with the monotheism of Islam, meaning there was no concept like this in the Indian tradition. That's why he's saying it started because of the influence of Islam. This is his viewpoint. Second, see Tarachand. Look, there is a हाँ बस इसी ये बेल काम नहीं कर रही है क्या? बेल काम नहीं कर रही, चेक कर लेना इसको. Okay, so look, there is a difference between if some historian is saying it is because of the message of Sufism, that would be different from the core tenets of Islam, because this is the liberalist form of Islam. Is it clear? there would be difference. So that's why there is a difference in these viewpoints. ठीक है, सबको सेम के साथ इक्वेट मत करना कि सर सब एक ही चीज बोल रहे हैं. हाँ? So Tarachand, what he says, the idea of equity and universal brotherhood taught by Bhakti saints was equivalent to Sufi thought. This is by Tarachand. Okay. Then we come to Yusuf Hussain. So Yusuf Hussain says up to 13th century it was indigenous or individual sentiments, and after this it came under the influence of Islam. Okay, then he compares that as reformation of Hinduism. The important phrases, you need to remember the important phrases, then only you can bring impact with the names of historians. Like if you're not writing reformation of Hinduism along with his name, कुछ ज़्यादा मतलब नहीं मिलने वाला है. Okay, you have to write specifically. कम याद करो, बेसिक से एक ही phrase याद करो with respect to one historian, but you should reflect it as it is. अगर आप अपना फिल्टर लगाते जाओगे तो लास्ट में पता एक ही मैसेज आएगा, सर सब सेम ही तो बोल रहे हैं. ठीक है, वो नहीं करना हिस्टोरियोग्राफी में. Okay. Next, see, some of the historians, they consider this as dissent, protest as well as reformative. Okay. So here we have J.R. Kamble. So he says that the main aim of the movement was to establish egalitarian society, but mainly in religious sphere, not in political, economic, other spheres, only in religious sphere. Okay. Then we have K. Ishwaran. So he looks upon Lingayatism. This is Lingayatism is related to Bhasvana, okay, from Karnataka, Lingayatism, okay, which rests on universal values of freedom, equality and rationality. So he says it was a kind of contribution to modernization. Okay. Then we have Irfan Habib. Irfan Habib says it was more or less related to breaking the caste rule and anti-caste religious movements. And he also further states that certain castes like Khatris in Punjab, etc., they supported Guru Nanak Ji just because of one important reason: they were not having the right kind of social status in the society. Okay. Then we have like Max Weber. He says it was status quoist. कोई बड़ा चेंज नहीं लाने की कोशिश की इन्होंने. Okay, and he says it even strengthened the position of Brahmanas. That is his perspective. David Kinsley, he said Bhakti movement opened the door to women. All right, but they were still left out in the longer run. All right. So if we see, there can be various interpretation with respect to the historiography of Bhakti, but the final conclusion we have already discussed. It was indigenous in character. There you can write in brief what we have just discussed. So what we have just discussed, क्या लिखना है उसमें से indigenous में? So there were elements of Bhakti, okay, which were there in Vedas as well as Upanishad. But if we see the Bhakti movement as in an organized form or a movement, this movement, here we had elements of Bhakti only. It was not a movement. It became a movement in Tamil Nadu, Alvar and Nayanar, okay, because they publicized the important activities. So from 8th to 10th century, the major focus of Bhakti movement was in Tamil Nadu, and in 11th and 12th century, the main focus was in Karnataka, okay, where we can talk about Lingayatism or Bhasvana and his role in the social reform, okay, and then eventually it comes towards North India. We see the changes in the Northern India, political changes, which led to the rise of Bhakti movement. Within this, one important thing was the coming of Ramananda, saints like Ramananda, who brought the Bhakti movement from south to north. All the important saints, like we have Kabir, they were the disciples of Ramananda. So the final character, if UPSC asks, this would be the final character. Yes, we can accept there may have been influence of Sufism, but it is not so that the Bhakti movement started just as a counter current towards the coming of Islam. We cannot accept it as such, okay, because the elements of Bhakti were in India long before the coming of Islam. They won in 1192. Okay, Arab invasion of Sindh was not having any important changes on India. Okay, it was a very small kind, and that too on a peripheral area. So that we cannot accept that could have impacted the coming of the Bhakti movement, right? So it starts from south and eventually it comes towards the north. Okay, so that's why the last thing which you are going to understand is it was indigenous. So if you want to conclude, you can conclude on the indigenous point. Okay, is it clear? Now, which viewpoints are most important? whenever you try to remember the name of the historians, remember the historians with diverse kind of opinion. If somebody is saying on Islam, if we remember 3 people on Islam, that would not be of much help to us. What we should do? One indigenous, one related to Islam, third we can see with respect to the indigenous. Okay, here you can remember J.R. Kamble, you can remember K. Ishwaran, okay, and then after that you can remember Max Weber and David Kinsley. Somebody is saying it is status quo, somebody is saying it tried to uplift the status of women. So remember, those 5 views should be diverse. Okay, there will be many topics in which you may have 10, 12 historians, but that will not be our requirement. Our requirement is 5 viewpoints, and that too specifically they should be diverse. So कभी भी आंसर पढ़ना शुरू करो, स्टार्टिंग में जिनका सेम व्यू पॉइंट है उसमें से एक आधे को हटा सकते हो, that can be left out, so that you can prioritize. I'll remember only these 5 historians and nothing else. Is it clear? समझ में आया टॉपिक? हिस्टोरियोग्राफी, origin, any doubt? Okay. Let us go toward the second topic, debate on feudalism. This is a very important topic. Take 5 minutes and try to read this debate. Okay? Because this debate is very important. UPSC normally asks question on feudalism from early medieval period. This is one important debate. What did you understand? What is feudalism? There are certain elements of feudalism which you need to understand. Okay? One very important topic is there is a difference in feudalism of Europe versus India. This concept of feudalism was mainly applied to European society. And since a large number of Marxist historians they wrote on early medieval India. So they applied this concept of European society on early medieval period. Okay, early medieval period. So that's why specifically we need to understand what is feudalism, what is the opinion of these Marxist historians, and in their last, what is the overall difference in the feudalism of India and Europe. So let us first see the elements. So elements पढ़ो जल्दी से. There are superior rights of feudal lords, which was the basis of appropriation of revenue. Second, proprietary and hereditary rights, means it was not like they could be transferred. Third, they enjoyed certain level of judicial, administrative, military as well as fiscal powers, practice of sub-infeudation and hierarchical landed intermediaries, and they enjoyed important feudal titles like Thakur, Raja, Rao and Rauts. Okay, so these are the elements of feudalism. In general, when we talk about feudalism, important political features will be fragmentation of authority. There is fragmentation of central authority. Okay, and if we see in the economic sphere, there is rise of agriculture, but there is decline of trade and commerce at the same time. That's why land becomes the most important commodity. As all of us understand, this system in India was known by Samanta system. It was Samanta system mentioned in many of our texts. Okay, so in our literary text, this is mentioned as Samanta system, where king's power was divided among multiple people. The kind of hierarchy creates. Okay, so in that manner you can understand there is a hierarchy of power from the top till the bottom, and all of them they had certain kind of differential land rights. Because during this time, since there is fragmentation of central authority which affects trade and commerce, the major elements it becomes agriculture. So everybody wants land rights. So this is what feudalism is eventually. करते हैं अभी, इसके बाद करेंगे एक बार. पहले एक बार डिबेट डिस्कस कर लेते हैं. Then we will discuss the differences in the European and Indian form of feudalism. Okay, UPSC has asked certain questions. Yes, Arun, you can mention the historiography theory. That would also be right. Okay. So we have Law Basis. So Law Basis, we do have foundation course that you can see from the description. There is a number in the history helpline that you can dial and you can get all the relevant details. Okay. Anyway, the more important thing for us is what kind of changes or what kind of feudalism steps were foreseen by various historians. All of you know about feudalism from above, feudalism from below, all such things that you need to remember. So first of all, we need to be thorough with the debate, okay, and then we need to understand the difference between Indian and European form of feudalism. All right, is this clear? The basic concept, if UPSC asks कि feudalism के ऊपर कोई भी question आता है, you can make a box and write the elements of feudalism which is mentioned in your handout. Is it clear? Because एक definition में पूरा उसको समझाना आपके लिए possible नहीं होगा. In the introduction, you can talk about the origin of feudalism. So that there was a system of land grants. So in India, this has started because of a system of land grants. If we see the initial origination of land grants, it is from Satavahana inscription. And during Vakataka period, we see the maximum number of land grants being given to officers, rajas, etc. Okay, so in introduction part, you can always talk about that feudalism in India is related to the system of land grants which started during the Satavahana period as mentioned in their inscription, but it became pronounced during the Vakataka period where maximum number of land grant in Indian ancient history could be found. This is how feudalism starts in it. This is the origin. Then you can write the various features. We have just discussed the elements of feudalism. Okay, one more associated question we have is, look, North India और South India हमेशा एक दूसरे के अगेंस्ट रहते हैं. So whenever there is weak North India, we have a stronger South India. This tradition is from ancient history itself. Okay, so UPSC asked one question that from 550 AD onwards, from 550 AD onwards, the strength and vigor of history lies in South India or beyond Vindhyas. So, what is the main reason for that? Feudalism in North India started. So, around 550 AD, we see the downfall of Gupta Empire. So, Gupta Empire was no more, because of which political authority became very weak in North India. But when we see South India, we had stable under Pallavas, okay, as well as Chalukyas. So that was a stable political system which was not there in North India. Second, even if we see military wise, South India was becoming powerful while the North India was getting divided. Like we see Harshvardhana was defeated by Pulkesin II. Okay, we have the whole inscription to use as a source. Even if we talk about economy, so from this time onwards there was decline in the Roman trade. Since there was decline in the Roman trade, here we also see the trade and commerce also declined to an extent. There is also various theory by R.S. Sharma like there was urban decay, etc., etc., as well as monetary anemia, but that we'll discuss later on. But the most important thing in front of us is the power was shifting towards South India. While in North India, we were going towards Tantrism. We covered this topic in ancient India. Okay. In South India, we were going towards Bhakti, Alvar and Nayanars. So that's why you have to do a comparative analysis of political, economic, social, culture and religious life if any such question comes in the exam. Yes, art and architecture also. Yes, South India was blooming from that time itself. Okay, so the South Indian Dravidian style of architecture, it was going towards prominence after 550 AD, Pallavas, freestanding temples and eventually coming of the Cholas that led it to the peak. Okay. So all these factors you can note down. Okay, and this question is mostly because of the impact of feudalism in North India. Is it clear? So whenever we talk about any debate, you need to differentiate between North India and South India. And feudalism also one such debate where the impact on South India was very less. We had stable political system in South India. We were not having these features in South India. Is it clear? When we go about critical analysis, so in critical analysis, we need to be very sure that the model of feudalism which is applied to Indian society, first of all, it was different from Europe, and second, it was not there in the southern India. Yes. Yes, that's what you need to write now with the emergence of Bhakti movement. राइट तो वहां पे भक्ति मूवमेंट स्टार्ट हो रहा था, नॉर्थ में अभी तांत्रिक विद्या पे आ गए थे हम, ठीक है. दिस इज व्हाट वाज हैपनिंग. ओके, नाउ लेट अस सी द डिबेट. नाउ लेट अस कम टू डिबेट. सो द पर्सपेक्टिव, इज इट क्लियर? सो ब्यूटिलिज्म कैन बी लिंक्ड टू एनी टॉपिक, सो यू हैव टू मेक श्योर कि अगर उस पर भी कुछ आ रहा है तो यहाँ का कुछ थोड़ा सा हिस्टोरियोग्राफी आप मेंशन कर पाए. यस, ओके, बीडी चट्टोपाध्याय कैन बी यूज्ड. दैट वी डिड इन द एंशिएंट इटसेल्फ ना, लैंड ग्रांट्स वाला जो था उसमें हमने किया था, बीडी चट्टोपाध्याय का पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू पढ़ा था. एनीवे, लेट अस कम टू द डिबेट ऑफ फ्यूडलिज्म. फर्स्ट वी हैव इज द व्यू पॉइंट फ्रॉम डीडी कोसाम्बी. सो ही गेव टू व्यू पॉइंट्स. He said feudalism from above and feudalism from below. So what is the meaning of feudalism from above? The king himself gave the powers to the subordinates, and they started availing various important functions, and with the period of time these people, they become very powerful, and when the central authority became weak, they became independent. Okay, this is feudalism from above. When we talk about feudalism from below, so it just means the power was captured by certain intermediaries between the state and the peasants, and when these people became powerful enough, they were able to influence a lot of force on the central authority. So this is feudalism from below. These are the two terms. Last year यही 10 marker में question आया था, which evaluate the feudalism debate. So we have feudalism from above as well as feudalism from below. Okay, so this is one thing. Then let us come to the viewpoint of BNS Yadav. Yes. तो फ्यूडलिज्म फ्रॉम, हाँ तो वही तो उनसे कलेक्ट करेंगे. पहले टेरिटरी में सारा टैक्सेशन सिस्टम सेंट्रल अथॉरिटी के हाथ में था, बट व्हेन द सेंट्रल अथॉरिटी गिव द फंक्शंस टू दीस पीपल, दे विल टेक द टैक्सेस. Okay, and then eventually it will be passed on. System ऐसा नहीं होता, suppose you are collecting 100 rupees, so you will keep all the 100 rupees. King gave you power to collect taxes, you collected 100 rupees. So you have to pay something to the central authority. It is not कि भाई चलो ठीक है मजा आ गया अब लाइफ में. Okay, that is not possible. Yes. Okay. Let us come to the viewpoint of BNS Yadav. Okay, so he says that they impose added restriction on the mobility of peasants, since military officers were being given these land grants. Because of this one specific reason, there was restriction on the mobility of peasants. Why is BNS Yadav saying this? Yes, Marxist theory, right? I understand, but why? European. Because in Europe there used to be a system in which the landlord used to control all of the peasantry, and there was a specific word for them, that was serfs. Okay, they were not having any kind of control over production. They were more or like agricultural slaves. Is it clear? That's why BNS Yadav is coming up with a viewpoint where he is talking about the mobility of peasantry. They were under the control of these military governors. Even though we do not have any specific source to prove that, okay, but BNS Yadav is coming up with this viewpoint to strong the case or to enhance the scope of feudalism in Indian context. Okay. Then come to the viewpoint of R.S. Sharma. So his focus was mostly on the land grant system. Okay, so far nobody was focusing too much on the land grant. So he is saying, because of the land grants, all these things happen, like administration is based on control and possession of land, fragmentation of authority, hierarchy, etc. Okay, but when we talk about the validity of feudalism in India, now this is an important part. Validity of feudalism. To what extent can we accept there was feudalism in India or not? In ancient India, we read one specific debate regarding the ownership of land Okay, so we had three viewpoints. It was owned by the king, it was also owned by the private individuals, and eventually some of the land was also communal in nature. So one year UPSC asked only this question: on the basis of ownership of land, can we say that there was feudalism in India? Because feudalism to the highest extent can only be there when king became the owner of the land rather than just a controller. Is it clear? So question can include the conversion of the concepts of ancient as well as medieval India. So there you have to first talk about land ownership, which we have already discussed. Okay, so majority of the opinion that we have, so land ownership, we have only two ideas, that there can be royal ownership as well as there can be private property, because private property is antithesis to the concept of feudalism. Is it clear? So since we had both the categories of land ownership, in that question you need to say, if we go by this, we cannot say that there was feudalism in India. Feudalism could be only in the patches, it could not be the overall concept of 100%. It could apply to the land or the decentralization of political authority, but it could not apply. Like if we see that Delhi में देखते हैं, Delhi में कितना percentage property is under the control of government? Let us say a rough example, 40%, and 60% we have is private ownership. So only in 40% we can have this feudalism concept. In 60% we cannot have the concept of feudalism, because वहाँ पे private property है. Feudalism cannot control, or the landlords, they cannot control the private property of other individuals. They can only have control over the state's authority. वही authority तो उन्हें मिल सकता है ना at the max. All right. So let us see the arguments which checks the validity of feudalism. First of all, early medieval society was characterized by self-dependent or free peasant production. Now this was not a part of European model. Here, as we have said, there was concept of serfdom, but here we had free peasantry. So if we see only on the basis of this point, we cannot say that there was even feudalism in India, because serfdom means that the production process of agriculture, meaning कौन सा क्रॉप कल्टीवेट करना है, कब कल्टीवेट करना है, all such decisions they were taken by the landlord or the feudal lord. But such system was not there. Since this peasantry was free, it was free to take, they were having free production rights. This was not there in Europe. All right. Since the production process was under the control of feudal lords, their mobility was restricted, because peasant एक बार गया वापस आएगा नहीं, they'll run away, because it is more of a agricultural slavery system. Okay, so there was restriction on the mobility of peasantry. That's why they had a concept of manor. बड़े बड़े किले बनाए हुए थे उन्होंने, okay, so that they can control the peasantry. But we did not had any concept. There was no concept of manor in India. हाँ, बड़े बड़े किले होते हैं, स्पेसिफिकली बनाए इसी पर्पस के लिए जाए जाते हैं. लार्ज एग्रीकल्चरल ट्रैक्ट्स के लैंड के उसके अंदर एक बाउंड्री क्रिएट कर लेते थे. ओके, सो दैट इज नोन एज मेनोर सिस्टम. Those of you who are new, for you the better batch would be foundation, because QIP में तो सीधा ये समझने लगोगे तो वैसे ही आधा पैनिक हो जाओगे कि कैसे सब क्या चल रहा है. Okay. For Raghunath as well as Lone, it's better to go for foundation. Anyway, let us come back to this topic. See the second point. the peasants had control over means and processes of production. Is it clear? ये आर्गुमेंट आपको लिखना पड़ेगा इन योर आंसर्स, अदरवाइज क्या होगा, फ्यूडलिज्म में बस ये लिखते रह जाओगे, फ्रेगमेंटेशन ऑफ अथॉरिटी, फ्रेगमेंटेशन ऑफ अथॉरिटी, और कुछ दिमाग में नहीं आ रहा. You have to come up with the nuanced statements, nuanced points, and these are those points. Okay, see the third point. There was relatively stability in socio and economic structure. There was not much change at the level of techniques of agricultural production. Okay, एग्रीकल्चर अगर किसी के अंदर प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस में कंट्रोल आ जाएगा तो देयर विल बी चेंज इन दी टेक्नोलॉजी के ऑल्सो, बिकॉज दीज पीपल कैन कंट्रोल दैट. इज इट क्लियर? दीज पीपल कैन कंट्रोल दैट. प्लस in Europe this serfdom was also having the validity of state. That's why it was easy to control the production process. But in India there was no such directive from the state to have control over the peasantry. Like you have seen in whole of the modern world, कहीं ना कहीं serfdom को abolish किया था. Like when you read Russian Revolution, you read कि only in the 19th century serfdom was abolished. Okay, that means even state was having a kind of contribution towards the feudalistic society, where these feudal lords were having privileges. Along with that, they had certain duties. And when these privileges were taken away in France, it became French Revolution. Right? So you need to connect the topics कि अच्छे से समझ में आए. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट सी द अप्रोप्रिएशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर सरप्लस टू स्टेट फॉर्म द चीफ इंस्ट्रूमेंट ऑफ एक्सप्लोटेशन. सो द मेन फॉर्म ऑफ एक्सप्लोटेशन इन इंडिया वाज large number of taxes which were imposed on the peasantry rather than controlling their process कि तुम आज जाके यही cultivate करो. That was not the reality. Okay. Next we see the B.D. Chattopadhyay. All right. So B.D. Chattopadhyay, what he says, he has questioned the overall theory of urban decay and decline of trade in post-Gupta period. So this was given by R.S. Sharma. R.S. Sharma says large number of cities, we went to the phase of deurbanization, but his arguments are very open-ended in nature. So what is the nuanced manner is, certain cities, yes, they went through the stages of urban decay, but at the same time, there were rise in the urbanization in other cities. Okay, this could be reasoning. If we see the contemporary modern India, if some states are not developing, but at the same time there can be some other states which are developing at a fast pace, this also applies to urbanization. Okay, so this was the reason which was given by B.D. Chattopadhyay. Then let us come to Harbans Mukhia. Harbans Mukhia says that feudalism emerged due to changes in society in Europe. But in India, it has been attributed to the practice of making land grants. Okay. Then he also come up with a comparative appraisal of medieval Western Europe with that which is happening in medieval India. He says land productivity was very high in India in comparison to Europe. So there was no requirement to control the production process. अगर naturally अच्छा चल रहा तो उसको control क्यों करेगा? What would be the objective or motivation behind it? Okay. Then we see second, he also says there was fundamental difference in condition in India compared to Europe. Also, it is important that the forms of labor used in agriculture should follow a different pattern. So the manner in which labor was being used in India and in Europe, there are fundamental differences. Okay. But when we talk about these critics who are not accepting the validity of the feudalism, they also have certain limitations. Like, see the limitations. First, superior rights and inferior rights were there over land. That we understand. Within land, there were different hierarchy of land rights. Some were having superior, some were having inferior. First. Second, there can be certain evidence of subjection as well as immobility of peasantry. Like we had Vishti system. We had Vishti system. उसको mention कर लो. We had Vishti system under Guptas. We had Vithi system under Cholas. But we do not know the extent of such system. किस लेवल पे था ये? All right? plus if we say that there were no change in the society, that it somehow reinforces the colonial viewpoint of view, because there were changes in society from ancient to medieval India. So the transition phase had certain characteristics. If we say कि बिल्कुल same था, it would be more like colonial point of view. Let us come to the conclusion. So overall, we cannot deny that there was certain elements of feudalism in India, because the land rights became the main source of power. As most of you heard that during early medieval period, irrespective of the Kshatriya status, those who were having land, they were called as Rajas. Okay, that the system of feudalism was developing, but it was more in the political sphere rather than in the production process. Is it clear? It was more in the political sphere. That's why our model of feudalism is different from the model of Europe. Okay, this is the nuanced conclusion which all of you need to remember. Yes. स्टेजेस में यार आपको यही करना है, क्या क्या प्रैक्टिसेस है. जैसे स्टार्टेड विद द सिस्टम ऑफ लैंड ग्रांट्स. These land grants which were initial, they were given by the state as a kind of reward. Okay, so initially we see that the feudalism started as feudalism from above. Okay, later on there was certain, we can say, capture of power, because central authority was becoming weak with the period of time. Since they were becoming weak, they had to depend upon certain intermediaries. Okay, and those intermediaries became powerful. So later on, from feudalism from above, we see the rise of feudalism from below. Okay, stages of feudalism में हमें यही करना है. Political domain में क्या problem है, ठीक है. Then we have to talk about the economic domain. Economic domain में, like, they have come with the theory of urban decay as well as monetary anemia. So these are the stages of feudalism which can be applied to India. Our third urbanization starts from 13th century with the coming of the Turks. Okay, here you can also write certain viewpoints of like Nilkant Shastri in this particular question. Okay, so Nilkant Shastri says that there was Brahmana peasant alliance in South India. This is also one viewpoint by him with respect to South India. That can also be mentioned. Okay, but when it comes to feudalism, क्या क्या stages हो सकते हैं? So we have to start with the system of land grants, because in India majorly feudalism is related to land grants or the Samanta system. Samanta system का ही आपको समझाना है बस. Okay. Let us come to the next debate, which is very much related to feudalism, that is monetary anemia. पॉजिटिव में, नेगेटिव एनालिसिस में बात कर रहे हैं हम कि सपोज somebody said there is feudalism in India, but somebody again said there was no feudalism in India. So what are the viewpoints which are not accepted by them? तो उनका हम एनालिसिस कर रहे हैं. That's why we are saying these people who are coming with the counter arguments, they are not looking into these details which we have. Okay, so दोनों का हमने critical analysis करना है. Next comes monetary anemia. So monetary anemia is nothing but the best form of coins that we had, they were under Gupta period. Okay, scale as well as aesthetic sense. So from Gupta period onwards, we see a decline in overall coinage, and this has been used to come up with the theory of monetary anemia.
Largest number of gold coin in Egypt. Purest question. Quality based question.
प्योरिटी वाइज, तो ठीक है वो पीटी वाला है, ये एनालिसिस पे आओ. दिस इज मोर इम्पोर्टेंट फॉर अस. व्हाट इज इम्पोर्टेंट फॉर अस? एनीमिया, यू नो, डेफिशिएंसी ऑफ आयरन. Okay, so that's why they have used this debate. There was monetary anemia, there was deficiency of coinage. Okay, so this is also one of the debate which is used for applying feudalism in Indian context. Okay, where secondary activities, secondary economic activities or trade and commerce gets declined. Okay, so monetary anemia is also one keyword which you need to use in the feudalism theory. Anyway, so for this, the argument was put forward by none other than Marxist historian, and that is R.S. Sharma. All right. So arguments देखो in favor. So he wrote in 1965, paucity of coinage in post-Gupta times, its links with trade and commerce, okay, and consequent emergence of feudal social formation. He proposed a theory of urban decay, which resulted in decline of trade, collapse of artisan activity, and disappearance of metallic money. Disappearance, खत्म ही हो गया सब कुछ. So this is put forward by R.S. Sharma. Now we need to look into what is the debate all about. What aspects of monetary anemia is he talking about, and can we come up with certain counterpoints? Do we have any evidences in literary or archaeology which can tell us that there was no monetary anemia? Okay, see the evidences that we have. So if we see from 750 to 1200 time period in Eastern India, there we found a long series of Harikela silver coinage. Okay, first. Second, we also see uses of coddies. Coddies in small transaction became popular during early medieval period. And third word you also need to remember, that is churning. Churning is nothing but gold dust. Dust was also used. So that means कि जो transaction की value है, that may have become less. So that is known as churning. So these three things you need to remember. Harikela silver coin first, second use of coddies, and third use of churning. Then we can see the argument of Jonas Dale. So he says there was reduction of coin types and decline in the aesthetic quality of coinage. Okay, but not in the volume of coin in the circulation for any economy. What is the most important thing? Volume. कितना ओवरऑल वॉल्यूम रहता है, ठीक है ना. इकोनॉमी हम यही इंडिकेटर्स पढ़ते हैं ना. मनी मल्टीप्लायर, कितना उसका वेलोसिटी है, दैट इज मोर इंपॉर्टेंट रादर देन द कॉइनेज इटसेल्फ, कि कितने तरीके के कॉइन है. जैसे आपने देखा होगा आजकल 2000 का नोट मिलता है जल्दी से कैश में, वो जा चुका है बाहर, दैट हैज बीन स्टैश्ड. ओके, सो मैक्स टू मैक्स मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द जो आपको कैश मिलेगा आज की डेट में, इट इज 500 नोट. ओके, तो इससे हम क्या ये बोल सकते हैं इकोनॉमी खराब हो चुकी है? We cannot say that. Somebody may have stored it. Okay, यही एक point है which is used by historians. कि suppose if we do not find coins, it may also be the case somebody has hoarded it. है ना? Yes, yes. At the time of demonetization, there was a operation in Assam. All of us know that there are certain important groups there, okay, which are insurgents, right? So those groups specifically had one area where they had stashed all their money. Okay, and you must have seen this in serials. तो इतना ज्यादा स्टैश कर रखा था, सो देयर वाज लैक ऑफ ट्रक्स, टेक इट टू दी पुलिस स्टेशन। ठीक है, तो स्टैशिंग तो बहुत ज्यादा होती है, इट डिपेंड्स अपॉन कितना आप कर सकते हो और योर द मोड ऑफ योर इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी। ऑलराइट, सो होर्डिंग इज इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट। अगर आप आज का देखोगे, आज की इकोनॉमी में तो 2000 का नोट्स यार इंडिया में ही नहीं मिल रहा है, कहाँ चला गया होगा? किसी ने स्टैश करना आसान होता है ना, 400-500 के नोट, ठीक है, और एक 2000 का, तो अगर आपको ट्रांसफर भी करना है तो इट इज इजी, कम स्पेस लेगा। ठीक है, एनीवे let us come to the references which are mentioned in archaeological and literary texts. So early medieval texts that we have, okay, Prabandha, Chintamani, Lilavati, okay, Lekha Padhati, all of them they talk about the various words which talks about coinage. So this is one reference which we see to counter the argument of monetary anemia. Suppose there had been no coinage, then why these texts are talking about coinage? क्यों बात कर रहे हैं उसके बारे में? Then we see certain inscriptions, okay, like Siyodhani inscription refers to varieties of dramas in the mid 10th century. Remember this inscription because when you have to mention the sources, the argument that you put in the answer, they depend upon the sources कितना mention किया है in paper 1. So remember this inscription, okay. Then if we see, suppose there is monetary like we say कि ठीक है coinage reduction हो गया, but can't society adjust to that by going into some other manner? barter system नहीं strong हो सकता? like if we see Harappan civilization, it was urban, ठीक है, it was dependent upon trade, probably more better than Rig Veda, but still it was without coins. Society can also adapt if we have less number of coins, that we need to understand. So certain transactions were not even affected by lack of coinage. See the important points, okay, like Pandyas, they were regular buyers of important horses, cannot be thought in terms of very poor Pandyan currency. Role of barter system, if we can see, so horses they were input, they were not paid in cash but in goods like silk, spice or ivory. Then we see the network of Indian Ocean trade, ki how the trade was there. So K.N. Chaudhary has come up with the argument. He says they were divided into similar segments stretched from Red Sea and Persian Gulf to Gujarat, Malabar, etc. Hence the nature of trade changed instead of decline of trade. Previously the way trade was working, it has become relatively narrow in nature, but that does not mean trade itself has stopped. Okay. Then we see evidence of commerce in luxury goods. Majority of the kings, feudal lords as well as heads of temples, so they were sourcing important luxury goods. अगर कोई luxury good मंगा रहा है, that means specifically people are having money or they are having at least purchasing power. Is it clear? What we can see from this, that the purchasing power was intact. Is it clear? Even if you're not having coins, you have different goods which could be used as a barter for purchasing the or exchanging of goods. That means you have purchasing power, and purchasing power is more important in certain instances rather than just having some coinage. Is it clear? Next we see the critical examination of overall debate. So even if we say that the society adjusted, even these viewpoints have certain limitation. Like you can see, like in mid-eastern India are silent about the participation of indigenous people, meaning even if trade was happening, what was the role of indigenous people? That has not been mentioned. Second, if we see the meaning of the word like Vangali, which means very poor and miserable, this became important in the Bengali tradition. But from 8th century onward, if we see, Kashmir shows certain coinage, but it was of poor quality. However, the partial monetization started during this period was contributing to economic growth, but there was parallel development of other instruments also, like Hundika. Suppose there is a very unstable political system, ठीक है, आप A point से B point पे जा रहे हो, you have a lot of risk in carrying money from this place to that place. कि आपको यहां से जाना है मेरठ तक, ठीक है, दिल्ली से मेरठ, बीच में 2-3 स्टॉप्स आए, रात को निकल रहे हो आप 1 बजे के आसपास, व्हाट वुड यू डू? कैश लेके जाओगे? So Hundika system became important because we were not having political stability. That's why merchant came up with this system in which they can easily transport goods from one place to another without changing money. So that's why Hundi system became important. And if we see Lekha Paddhati, which talks about the life of Gujarat of 12th and 13th century, so it talks about various means of raising loans for consumption as well as commercial ventures. Okay. So we can see that there may have been certain regional exceptions, but the all India perspective fits in the general hypothesis of Professor Sharma. Okay. Despite the plethora of references of coin, the evidence of overall volume is almost negligible. Okay. Nor can we overlook the poor purchasing power of early medieval coins irrespective of the metals used. Alright. So what we are saying specifically, even if we see just coinage, if we say just coinage, so yes, there was decline of coinage. But if we talk about overall economy, but this economy was not suffering because of decline in the coinage. Is it clear? This is what we are talking about. There may have been decline in the coinage, but due to this, there was no large scale problems for the economy, because sometimes society adjusts to the condition which may be happening. So we were having trade, okay, we were also having urbanization, we were also having the long distance trade networks, but we were having less number of coinage. So there may be monetary anemia, but partial monetization increased with the period of time, but there was no substantial impact on the economy of the time. Is it clear? इस डिबेट को इस तरीके से याद रखना. हाँ, यस यस, हाँ, वो अब हमें देखना है. और इसमें भी ये जो मॉनेटरी एनीमिया है, इसका ज्यादा इम्पैक्ट नॉर्थ में है रादर देन इन साउथ इंडिया, बिकॉज फ्यूडलिज्म का जो है उसी का मोर इम्पैक्ट है. ओके, दैट्स व्हाई यहाँ पे लिखा ना, देयर मे हैव बीन सम रीजनल एक्सेप्शंस, दोज रीजनल एक्सेप्शन मोस्टली इन दी साउथ इंडिया. ओके, तो मेंशन भी कर सकते हो साउथ इंडिया, वहां पे मेंशन कर सकते हो, दैट विल बिकम योर मोर इम्प्लिसिट. हाँ, यस, यहाँ पे हमारा मेजर फोकस इसी पे है कि ट्रेड एक्टिविटीज वर देयर. ओके, देयर वाज एक्सचेंज ऑफ गुड्स, दैट इज मोर इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर एन इकोनॉमी. ट्रांजैक्शंस, इफ ट्रांजैक्शंस आर नॉट हैपनिंग, देन इट बिकम्स डिफिकल्ट फॉर दैट इकोनॉमी टू सर्वाइव. अगर इकोनॉमिक ट्रांजैक्शन नहीं हो रहे, मोड मे बी डिफरेंट. सो वी आर जस्ट सेइंग दिस मोड मे हैव चेंज्ड. So we may have come from coinage towards cowries or towards churning or towards barter system or towards hundikas. So yes, coinage was less, paucity of coinage was there, but overall we cannot say कि monetary anemia affected the economy. ठीक है, इसको एक बार मेंशन कर लेना लास्ट में, बिकॉज वो कंक्लूजन थोड़ा सा उस पर ये मेंशन कर लेना. ठीक है, that purchasing power may be less of the early medieval coins, but it did not impact the overall economy because of the adjustment done by the society, number one. Okay, and second, the development of systems like hundika. Like hundika becomes a very important mode of transaction during the medieval period. Even the state was using the services of the shops, जो यहाँ पे long distance trade में hundika को use करते थे. Okay, चेक सिस्टम की तरह ही काम करता है, बस परसेंटेज बेसिस पे. आप यहाँ से कहीं पे भेजोगे पैसा तो कुछ परसेंटेज तो उसका रखेंगे ना वो. व्हाट द बैंक्स डू, अब हमारे यहाँ पे आके पीओएस मशीन पे स्वाइप करोगे तो 1% तो बैंक के पास जाएगा ना. दैट्स व्हाट, यस, कमीशन बन जाता है. गुप्ता पीरियड, यस. मेन आर्गुमेंट क्या है ना, दे आर ट्राइंग टू जस्टिफाई फ्यूडलिज्म. वी हैव नेवर सेड कि भाई ट्रेडिंग और इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटीज जो है दे मे हैव बीन अफेक्टेड ड्यूरिंग द अर्ली मिडिएवल पीरियड, यस, बट दे सेड खत्म, डिक्लाइन, अर्बन डिके हो गया, मॉनेटरी एनीमिया हो गया, ये हो गया, वो काली एज क्राइसिस आ गया है. So all such theories, we cannot accept them without any verification. Okay, and that too, they applied it to the overall perspective of North India as well as South India. When we are saying there's stable political system in South India, so how can these things affect South India? So they do not differentiate. Okay, and one thing is that these were earlier historians. These were the earliest historians जिन्होंने इस चीज के ऊपर स्टडी करी. They always thought in the terms of all India. अभी जो न्यू हिस्ट्री लिखी जा रही है, दिस इज ओनली इन द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ रीजनल हिस्ट्री. दैट्स व्हाई अभी आगे जो रिसर्चेज होंगी वो सारी दे डू नॉट अप्लाई ईच एंड एवरी कंसेप्ट टू इंडिया, दे अप्लाई इट टू ए पर्टिकुलर रीजन, एंड दैट इज अ बेटर वे ऑफ राइटिंग हिस्ट्री. ओके, लेट अस सी नेचर ऑफ चोला स्टेट. So when we see Chola state has been explained by various historians. Two most famous perspective, all of us know that Neelakant Shastri says it was a centralized state. Okay, and here he talks about the powerful bureaucracy along with the powerful navy. Okay, so that's why they are saying it was a centralized state. Next comes the argument of Burtonstein. He came up with the concept of segmentary state. All of you understand the meaning of segmentary state? So what is segmentary state? Yes, power is divided into two parts. Rather than power, we can talk about sovereignty. Okay, so we have political sovereignty and ritual sovereignty. Okay, so this concept of segmentary state was mostly built in tribal societies. But the first problem with Burtonstein is Burtonstein applied it to Chola Empire. So that's why he tried to enthusiastically prove that this society was tribal. Okay, and second, it was segmentary. So when we talk about the segmentary state model, they say there can be two types of sovereignty. It can be political sovereignty and ritual sovereignty. Political sovereignty means that the center has real power and they can do whatever they wish to do in their empire. But ritual sovereignty means, like अब तो ये इतना important नहीं है, but previously what used to be there for legitimation of rule, there should be certain festivals on which people used to come from various places. Like Vijayanagar mein we had Mahanavami festival. So majority of the Rajas, they used to come at that point of time and they used to give gifts to the king. So they say they were more or less united by the ritual sovereignty, okay, rather than political sovereignty. So this is the concept of segmentary state. Okay, originally this concept was built for tribal societies, but Burtonstein has applied this to Chola Empire as well as Vijayanagar Empire. दोनों जगह ये डिबेट आता है कि सेगमेंटरी स्टेट है कि नहीं है. Okay, so have a look at the debate, read it quickly, then we can discuss. First viewpoint is very easy to understand. Majority of the Indian state, they were considered centralized by the earlier historians. Then some other theory comes, like here Burtonstein came up with the concept of segmentary state. Okay, and then we had feudal state as well as archaic state. These are the four prominent viewpoints which you need to remember. रिचुअल सॉवरेंटी का मतलब ये होता है कि रिलीजियस मैनर में दे कंसिडर, नॉमिनल हेड समझते हैं किंग को. किंग इज कंसिडर्ड एज अ नॉमिनल हेड and they are bound only by religious activities or ritual sovereignty rather than real power. king can give orders to them. He cannot give orders. What is there? There is a little kind of respect in religious sphere. कि he is the political as well as religious head. But political sovereignty नहीं है. Sovereignty का meaning है they can take independent and strong decisions and they have to abide by it. What they are saying, they do not have to abide by it. They'll just come at the time of certain festivals, certain rituals, and that is the only form of sovereignty which is working in the Chola Empire. Okay, but we do not accept it. So just read quickly, then we can discuss. It's a very easy topic in comparison with other topics. Shall we discuss? It's a very easy. Those एक मॉडल तो बहुत ही आसान है. फ्यूडल स्टेट. कोई भी किसी को फ्यूडल स्टेट बोल देता है और खुश हो जाता है कि आई एम एन हिस्टोरियन. ठीक है. So we have such history like Noboru Karashima. So they applied the idea of feudalism. Okay, because it was in fashion to apply the feudalism model, and Cholas they were ruling in South India. So that's why South India में भी जब feudalism apply किया गया, so they considered it as a feudalistic state. But the more important one is would be the segmentary state model. Because UPSC can ask a full-fledged question on this. Do you consider that Chola state was segmentary in nature? So you need to understand the concept. So the concept is very simple. So what they say, first of all, they said the society was segmented. Okay, society was segmented. Like in French Revolution or in France period, we have first estate, second estate and third estate. So just like that, they are saying the society was segmented. Second, if we see the political areas, कौन से areas हैं? They have central nadus which are under the direct control of Cholas, then comes intermediary and then comes the peripheral. So they say only in this central area they were having political sovereignty. In rest of the areas they were only having the ritual sovereignty. Is it clear? Are you able to understand this? Means nominal control hai, and that too on the basis of the rituals which are done at some important events. Okay, but we do not accept this theory. We say that this society was not segmented like they have depicted, as well as what they are saying, they were not having political authority at all in the peripheral area. That would be a bit too stretch. Okay, far too much. All right, so we reject this theory. Then comes the feudal state theory, and last one comes the archaic state. Okay, so archaic state comes from Catherine Go, and they say this was despotic rule. There was no private property. Okay, large scale slavery, etc. Okay, and state was using large part of revenue with rigid and oppressive tax collection. So that's why they are saying it is a archaic state, or it was not a modern form of state. All right. Last में जब भी conclusion करना हो ऐसे topics में, you need to remember there cannot be only one single point of view which can be affixed to any state administration. It could be Chola, Maurya, Gupta, whatever it is. Okay, because in general, if you see, whenever a state starts, like Chola's founder was Vijayala, so whenever the first founder starts, it's more or less a feudatory. If you see, Gupta's founder was Shri Gupta, so initially it would be feudatory. You see, Delhi Sultanate, initial person was Kutubuddin Aibak, initial time period was feudatory of Muhammad Ghazni. So initial phase is always like feudatory. Then we see consolidation, then we see centralization, eventually some weak rulers will come, we'll see decentralization, and last one they'll become mere rulers, where we can consider ritual sovereignty. The concept of ritual sovereignty can only be applied to very weak rulers which stay in the end, like we see the Mughals. Muhammad Shah Jafar hai, so he was more of a ritual sovereignty. He revolt भी start किया 1857, it was in the name of Mughal emperor. और मुगल एम्परर खुद इंग्लिश को बोल रहा है, भाई सॉरी मेरे नाम तो गलत यूज कर रहे हैं मुझे भेज दो कहीं पे, आई एम नॉट इन्वॉल्व इन ऑल दिस. सो दैट वाज रिचुअल सॉवरेंटी. और व्हेन ब्रिटिश केम, ओके, they were using Persian coins, Persian language, that was ritual sovereignty. They were not having, Mughal empire was not having any kind of control over the British company, but still they were using it. At that point it was ritual sovereignty. So that's why the main problem with us is we should not put any label on the political system, because under different rulers we can have different form of governance. अब अगर हम आज की बात करें, since independence we have different prime ministers, they have different personalities, and because of this Indian state has revolved around कभी centralized कभी decentralized, something like that. So can we say कि इंडिया में एक चीज फिक्स है कि centralization या फिर decentralization? Yes, we can say constitution is more towards centralization, but the manner in which governance is done, that is entirely different thing. Like when the coalition era started in 1990s, it was more of decentralization rather than centralization, because central government was dependent upon the support of these regional powers. Without their support, we don't even have a working Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Is it clear? So whenever a question comes on the state system, you should not put any label on that. You can always say that there is a centralization tendency or centripetal tendency in the case of Mauryas, okay, और we can see, यही चीज आपको ध्यान रखनी है, गुप्ताज में डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन टेंडेंसी है और सेंट्रीफ्यूगल टेंडेंसी है. ऑलराइट. और इफ यू सी दी चोलास, so there is a tendency towards centralization, okay, but it was balanced with the autonomy of the local self assemblies. But this was during the peak of the period. In the beginning period, there were elements of feudalism. During the later period, there were elements of ritual sovereignty. Is it clear? Concept को समझना पड़ेगा अच्छे से. So here you can easily remember. However, it will be an fallacy to impose any of the above model to entire Chola reign, as there are evidence that different models survived under different kingships. So short and sweet in 2 lines, you are able to provide a conclusion. So इसको रट्टा मार लेना है, ठीक है. This could become a general conclusion. कभी भी आपका क्वेश्चन आता हो centralized, decentralized, segmentary, this, that, these 2 lines can be important for you. Okay. Let us come to the next topic. Decentralization. Decentralization की तरफ जाएगा. But when we talk about कि it was managed, कि autonomy was managed, autonomous है. अब ऐसे ही आपका 18 में क्वेश्चन आया था by K.N. Shastri. Okay, so he gave an argument that the local self institutions okay It worked like a state. It worked like a state at the local level, which means that they were autonomous. It means they were autonomous. Okay. देखो डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन वी कैन अंडरस्टैंड, देखो देयर इज ऑटोनॉमी है बट वी आर नॉट सेइंग दे आर टोटली इंडिपेंडेंट. जब भी आप सेंट्रलाइजेशन और डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन बोलते हैं ना, वो क्वालिफाइड नहीं होता है. मीनिंग उसके साथ में आगे पीछे क्या रिस्ट्रिक्शन है, वी आर नॉट मेंशनिंग देम. दिस कैन बी यूज्ड एज एन आर्ग्यूमेंट फॉर सेंट्रलाइजेशन व्हेन वी से दैट मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द रेजोल्यूशन दे वर टेकन अंडर द प्रेजेंस ऑफ वन ऑफिसर फ्रॉम द सेंट्रल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. अगर हमें सेंट्रलाइजेशन टेंडेंसी दिखाना है, अगर हमें डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन दिखाना, दैट वी कैन से दैट दे वर हैविंग मोर ऑटोनॉमी, दीज फंक्शनरीज वर हैविंग ऑटोनॉमी. Okay, so it can be used as argument either way. Okay, but सिर्फ using centralization और सिर्फ saying decentralization, that is not correct. यूपीएससी में यही है, आंसर लिखते वक्त इस चीज का ध्यान रखना, बिकॉज अगर आप आंख बंद करके दोनों वर्ड यूज करने लग जाओगे ना, तो वो दिक्कत हो जाएगी. फिर आप आर्गुमेंट खत्म करके जनरल स्टडीज की हिस्ट्री लिखना शुरू कर दिया आपने. हियर वी हैविंग जस्ट आर्गुमेंट्स. किसी पे भी कंक्लूसिव कुछ है क्या फाइनल? हमने एक मिडवे को कंक्लूजन बना दिया हर जगह. सो वी आर नॉट हैविंग एनी स्पेसिफिक काइंड ऑफ कंक्लूजन. तो हिस्ट्री में डिबेट्स को डिबेट फॉर्म में ही आंसर कर रहने दो, अदरवाइज इफ यू ओवर सिंप्लीफाई इट, इट विल बिकम जीएस हिस्ट्री. लाइक हम आर एस शर्मा के एनसीईआरटी पढ़ते हैं, यूपीएससी का प्रीलिम्स वहीं से आता है, प्रीलिम्स का क्वेश्चन, तो वहां जो है वो मान लिया हमने, हम एक्सेप्ट कर लिया. इवन दो इन हिस्ट्री आर एस शर्मा जस्ट प्रोवाइड्स वन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. ही इज नॉट द फाइनल अथॉरिटी ऑन एनी ऑफ द टॉपिक. इज इट क्लियर? तो हमारे यहाँ हमें डिबेट्स को डिबेट की तरह ही पढ़ना पड़ेगा. इफ विल थिंक गोइंग टुवर्ड्स ओवर सिंप्लीफिकेशन, फिर तो आंसर लिखना मुश्किल हो जाएगा, फिर तो वन वर्ड आंसर हो जाएंगे. यस इट वाज सेंट्रलाइज्ड, यस इट वाज डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड. तो यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड द नुआंसेस. लाइक अगर जो पिछले वाला डिबेट आप पढ़ोगे मॉनेटरी एनीमिया को, कितने सारे नुआंसेस हैं उसके अंदर, कि भाई ठीक है कॉइन कम हो गया, लेकिन वो लिटरेरी सोर्स में भी है, आर्कियोलॉजिकल सोर्स में भी है. कॉइन मान सकते हैं कि पॉसिटी ऑफ कॉइनेज है, बट इट डिड नॉट हैम्पर द फंक्शनिंग ऑफ द इकोनॉमी. उसमें भी हम बता रहे हैं कहीं पे कि यहाँ ट्रेड चल रही है, यहाँ पे ये हो रहा है, वहां पे वो हो रहा है. अगर हम सीधा चले जाए कि नहीं मॉनेटरी एनीमिया नहीं है, खत्म, तो वो आंसर ही नहीं लिख पाओगे. तो डिबेट्स को बहुत ज्यादा रिविजन चाहिए, देन ओनली विल बी एबल टू राइट वेरी गुड आंसर्स. इज इट क्लियर? इस चीज पे ध्यान देना. नाउ लेट अस कम टू द डिबेट on the origin of Rajput. This is one topic which is directly mentioned in your syllabus, and UPSC may ask any question because it is debatable in nature. Okay, so beginning कहां से होती है on debate on the origin of Rajputs? All of us you know about Chand Bardai. So he said the origin of Rajput started when हवन कुंड किया गया था at the top of Mount Abu by Vashisht. Okay, and 4 clans of Rajputs came out. So it seems like some form of conversion was done, because literally तो हम मान नहीं सकते, ठीक है, literally तो we cannot accept. Some form of conversion was done at that point of time, कि कोई वर्ना चेंज किया होगा. Alright, so that's how we see the debate on the origin of Rajput. So just read it, इसमें सिर्फ पॉइंट्स याद करने, बहुत डिफिकल्ट कुछ नहीं है. Let us start our discussion. First, we have just discussed Agnikul theory. This is the first theory which is in front of us. Second comes dominant social groups. Certain dominant social groups wanted to get the Kshatriya status. Okay, and this is general in early medieval period. Like we have just discussed, because of the hierarchy of land rights, whoever had access to land now became a Raja, or they started taking the Kshatriya status. This is the second dominant social group, and this is given by Hermann Hulke. So he says this was the time when Kshatriyization as well as Rajputization both happened. Okay. Third comes Kshatriya origin theory. Some of these Rajputs, like we have the Pratihara, they claim lineage from the Kshatriya clans itself. Okay, so that is Kshatriya origin theory. Then we have mixed Brahman Kshatriya status theory. Okay, so in this, like we have the example of Pratiharas of Mandur. So they said they had descended from Kshatriya wife of a Brahmanas. So there is mixture of two Varnas, and from that we see the beginning of clan. Then we have foreign origin theory like Colonel Todd. Okay, Colonel Todd, V.S. Smith, they say they are descended of races like Shakas, Kushana and Hunas. Then we have tribal origin theory. Some of them, they were tribes, and with the period of time they became the ruling power. So here we have the example of like Gonds became Chandels, Bhar became Rathore, and Karwar became Kadwal. This is how they have given. Then B.D. Chattopadhyay, he does not see this debate as a linear debate कि कहाँ से आए होंगे. He says during this period of time there was growth of agricultural economy, and few social groups, they could increase their influence at the expense of the disadvantaged tribal group, because tribal group, their primarily economic activity was hunting and food gathering, and those agricultural groups, they started increasing their influence over the land. Okay, so there was a growth in agricultural settlements, and some of them during this period we see Rajputization of the various tribes. Okay, then comes the linear power formation. So in this they talk about that certain tribes itself, they became superior over the time. Okay, like here we have the Gulia kingdom in South Rajasthan succeeded the early tribal chiefdom of the Bhils. The tribal उस chiefdom को हटा के they became more powerful. So in conclusion, 4 से 5 थ्योरी याद कर लो which are different. ठीक है ना. एक अग्निकुल वाला तो इजीली याद रह जाएगा. Social dominant group wala bit is very easy. Hermann Kulke talks about that. Okay, that could be the reason. Then you can talk about the claiming of the Kshatriya lineage itself, like in inscription में दिया हुआ है. Then mix Brahmana and Kshatriya status. एक foreign origin है, which is very easy to understand. ठीक है, नाम याद रखना. एक V.S. Smith तो हर किसी को remember आता है historian. V.S. Smith. Okay, you can remember his name. Okay, that is saying. Then B.D. Chattopadhyay, who does not see, is at more of a linear theory. He talks about the agriculture economy which was responsible for the rise of some dominant groups. इतना याद कर लो, 5-6 थ्योरी है, आंसर आता है, लिख के लिख देना. There may have been multiple reasons for the rise of Rajputs, but it seems इनमें से जो सबसे ज्यादा फेमस है वो कौन सा है? बीडी चट्टोपाध्याय. ओके, बीडी चट्टोपाध्याय जो है इज नॉट सीइंग एनी लीनियर वे कि भाई यहां से यहां इनका आया हुआ. ही सेज ये इक्वेशन थी इन विच देयर वाज राइज ऑफ राजपूत. तो इसकी थ्योरी सबसे ज्यादा एक्सेप्ट करते हैं हम ओवरऑल. ओके, बिकॉज ही इज नॉट सेइंग कि सिर्फ एक इस वजह से हुआ होगा, पूरी एग्रीकल्चर इकोनॉमी में है. ओके, सो द ओरिजिन कैन बी ट्रेस फ्रॉम डिफरेंट स्ट्रेटा ऑफ इंडिजिनस पॉपुलेशन इंक्लूडिंग क्षत्रिय, ब्राह्मण, सम ट्राइब इंक्लूडिंग द एबोरिजिन वंस. Let us come to the next debate. This is also an easy one. There has been a lot of commentary on the nature of towns in medieval India. Some of them say they are only camp towns, okay, and some of them say it is just an extension of village, nothing else. So there has been a lot of debate on medieval towns, their categories. Okay, like all of you know about Francois Bernier. So he said they were more of camp towns, meaning wherever royal authority wanted to establish a city, वहाँ पे military का garrison बन जाता था, and it became a camp town. All right, like here we have one perspective of Francisco Pelsart. So he says it was nothing but an extension of village. All right, so just give it a read. It is very easy, not that much difficult. Shall we start? पढ़ लिया, easy है वैसे, कोई ज़्यादा difficult debate नहीं है इसमें. Okay, so he says Francisco Pelsart that it was just an extension of villages. कि सिर्फ village को extend किया है. Why he is saying this? He is saying an average town in Mughal Empire was in fact an extension in terms of social unities, okay, attitude, values, etc. So this rural-urban continuum is thus notable feature of urbanization during medieval period. Then we see the evidence from various sources, like we have Tabakat Akbari. So it talks about there were around 120 big cities and 3200 kasbas, small towns. Alright. In the 17th century, with increasing trade and commerce, this number had grown even further. There was some evidence like Harigarh, Kundi, etc. accounted to be village in 17th century, and they were elevated to kasbah in the early 18th century. So we are talking about the transformation of town from one specific to the other. Like Agra was a village which suddenly became a city because Akbar in 15th chose it to be his resident. All right. Okay. Then we have the urban elites had land based, revenue based, like living in urban areas, but revenue was coming from rural areas. But if we see the perspective of S.C. Mishra, okay, S.C. Mishra, he says they were peasant urbanites for inhabitants of urban areas. कि more of like even if they were living in urban areas, वहीं से belong कर रहे थे. So overall, if we see the nature of medieval towns, so this nature of medieval towns can be broadly divided into various categories. Some of them they were administrative, some were religious, some were related to trade and commerce, some were related to the port areas. Okay, so there were different categories of medieval times. First we can see administrative like Delhi, Lahore, they were the prominent cities. Okay, then we see the religious like Varanasi and Mathura. Then we have military and strategic also like Attock and Asirgarh, and market based importantly we have the Patna, Ahmedabad. Okay, there were different variety. It cannot be say that they were just extension of the villages. Yes, some of them fell in that category, but many of them they were like this also. Now, just like the previous, we have seen perspective of some of the travelers. Here we can see the perspective of Ralph Fitch. So he says Fatehpur Sikri was considerably larger than London and more populous. And we see the Montserrat, he said that Lahore was second to none of the cities in Europe or Asia. Or Bernier himself, he said Delhi was no less than Paris and Agra were bigger than Delhi. Okay. And see the conclusion is more about the Mughal India. So if we see, there was around 15% urbanization in Mughal India. There was an estimate which was done by the various historians, alright, and this was more than Europe or the contemporary Europe. So if we talk about the scale of urbanization, India was more urbanized than Europe. Okay, so we cannot just say that they were extension of villages. In terms of social attitudes, we could accept कि भाई ठीक है दोनों जगह वही कास्ट सिस्टम सेम थिंग्स वर प्रिवेलिंग, बट इन टर्म्स ऑफ इकोनॉमिक सर्विसेज वी कैन नॉट एक्सेप्ट, राइट. यहाँ पर भी हम है तो कुछ कुछ जगह तो एटीट्यूड देखोगे इट कुड बी रिलेटेबल टू द विलेज, बट व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द सर्विसेज व्हिच आर प्रोवाइडेड बाय सिटी, दोस सर्विसेज आर मार्कली बेटर देन विलेजेस. कैन वी हैव दीज काइंड ऑफ सर्विसेज इन विलेजेस? अपने खुद का विलेज देखो, यहाँ पे नीचे उतरते चाय खाना पीना जो करना करो, जो सर्विस चाहिए सब कुछ मिल जाता है. सच अर्बन सर्विसेज कैन नॉट बी प्रोवाइडेड बाय द विलेजेस, सो वी कैन नॉट से दे आर जस्ट एक्सटेंशन ऑफ विलेजेस. ओके, काउंटर पॉइंट हमने दे तो दिया कि नेचर ऑफ कैटेगरीज ऑफ टाउन्स वही है काउंटर पॉइंट्स. एंड देन द ओपिनियंस ऑफ द अदर ट्रैवलर्स हु आर सेइंग कि हाँ ठीक है इंडिया में जो अर्बनाइजेशन था or Delhi was none to no other specific town of even Europe. Okay, the next comes the most famous debate of UPSC. Every year they'll ask you agrarian crisis, Jagirdari crisis, role of nobility, role of Mughal army, intellectual bankruptcy, political problems, etc. So you need to understand the decline of Mughal period. Take 10 minutes, read the whole debate, because every year एक क्वेश्चन तो यहां से आता है. पानी ले आओ. फर्स्ट पार्ट समझ में आया, व्हाट इज जागीरदारी क्राइसिस? What is Jagirdari crisis? There was a problem of Bejagiri, lack of good Jagirs. Okay? Whenever a Jagir used to be assigned to a person, there used to be an estimate and there used to be a final collection. Okay, so this difference was increasing. Suppose I assign you a place, I said you'll get 100 rupees from this Jagir and you're able to collect only 70. Out of this 70, you have to do a lot of expenditure on maintaining the troops, horses, etc. and you'll be left with very less revenue eventually. So this was the Jagirdari crisis. In this Jagirdari crisis, there was increase of Bejagiri. And two historians have worked on this. One is Satish Chandra, second one is Athar Ali. Okay, two important historians you can remember. Now, why this problem was increasing? First, there was influx of large number of mansabdars. Okay, when there was expansion in the Deccan, large number of mansabdar were incorporated and they had to be assigned one territory. This was one reason. Second, problems were accentuated or increased by the activities of Aurangzeb. Like when he expanded in Deccan, okay, he increased the Khalisa area. There were two types of areas, one under the direct control of center and one which were assigned to the functionaries of the state. So he chose to increase his own Khalisa area rather than giving it to the Jagirdars. So that's why what the Jagirdars started, they started making alliances. They started making alliances because ऐसा ना कि दो दोस्त हैं यार, हम दोनों alliance बना लेते हैं, we'll keep on staying in this area, ये अच्छा area है, ये अच्छी post है. This happen in bureaucracy also. जब भी किसी की बेकार पोस्टिंग आती है अगले दिन ही चिट्ठी शुरू हो जाती है, कहाँ पे अगली पोस्टिंग कहाँ पे होनी चाहिए, ये तो बेकार डिस्ट्रिक्ट मिल गई अपने को या बेकार कार्डर मिल गया अपने को, अब क्या करना जिंदगी में. ओके, so the same thing was happening to Jagirdars. So once there was degradation of political institution, so what these Jagirdars doing? Suppose whenever they were assigned an area, they started exploiting the peasants. As I have already told you, the difference between the Jama and Hasil was increasing, because of which they started exploiting the peasantry. When these Jagirdars were not able to collect the revenue which was required as per Jama, they were even given faujdari powers or police functions were given to them. These powers were signed by Aurangzeb. Because of that, the exploitation even more increased. Okay, and which further led to the agrarian crisis. Is it clear? This led to agrarian crisis. Because all these agricultural castes, they started or they raised the banner of revolt. Okay, so one crisis got linked with the other crisis. So let us see the agrarian crisis. कुछ नहीं, उन्होंने एक्सटेंड किया उसको, कंसेप्ट को इंप्रूव किया है. Both are accepting that Jagirdari crisis led to the downfall of मुगल एम्पायर. तो दोनों ने अपना अपना पर्सपेक्टिव रख दिया उसके ऊपर. ठीक है, जो मैं एक्स्ट्रा डिटेल आपको बताया उसको बस इनकॉर्पोरेट कर लेना कि व्हेनेवर देयर वाज एक्सपेंशन इन द डेक्कन, Aurangzeb chose to increase the Khalisa land instead of coming up with the new Jagirs from that area. Okay, let us see. So Irfan Habib has worked on this agrarian crisis. Irfan Habib. All right. So he says that the revenue system or the mechanism of collection of revenue was inherently flawed. So he said the revenue at the bigger rate possible to secure the nobles. On the other hand, they were squeezed maximum from the Jagirs, ruined the peasantry and destroyed the revenue paying capacity of the area. Okay, because they said इतना estimate है इस area का, इतना तो collect करना ही करना है. And this system was flawed in nature. Okay, this led to the nobles, Jagirs were liable to be transferred frequently. अभी भी transfer होता है. Because of which they could not get any kind of loyalty towards the peasantry. और they can think of कि भाई next year में peasant कुछ कर पाएगा या नहीं कर पाएगा, because they are squeezing all the revenue. Okay, and they did not find it necessary to follow a far-sighted policy of agricultural development. Since they were squeezing, it led to the issue of agricultural crisis. Okay, and this affected the political and social fabric. So we have large number of agriculture people who revolted, like Jats, Satnamis, Sikhs, as well as Afghans. So all these political crises, all these four were happening because of the agrarian crisis. Okay, इसको mention कर लो. You can add this to the handout. Satnami वो साधुस थे, ठीक है, who was living, and they were getting affected by the policies of Mughals. So that's why they started the. एक बार आपको 23 के लिए जो भी प्रिपेयर कर रहे हैं, you need to read BA IGNOU once. सारी चीजें क्लियर हो जाएंगी. Okay, those who are going for 22, बस इस पे ध्यान दो और ज्यादा सोचना नहीं है. की पॉइंट्स जो है उसको लिखना है आंसर के अंदर. Okay, whenever you write about agrarian crisis, in the end you have to link it with the revolts which of the 17th century. These were the revolts of 17th century which happened in the Mughal Empire. Okay, next comes the degeneration of Mughal nobility. Now, why nobility was getting degenerated? Majority of the important nobles, they were saying like we should go and make our own state. All of us, last year they asked the question on successor states. Okay, majority of these nobles, they were under the impression we should leave the central court and we should go and make our own state. Like in Nizamul Mulk, he went towards south and created Hyderabad. Okay, same thing can be seen in Bengal also, Awadh also, Sujauddaulah. So all these people, they went towards their own states and started creating their own sphere of influence. So it means nobility was more or less becoming degenerated. At the same time, this was one of the aspect of degeneration. Second aspect was those who were living in the central authority, they became the kingmakers. कि अब हमारे हिसाब से राजा बनेगा. Like we have the Sayyid brothers. Okay, they were trying to become the kingmakers. So this nobility state, they were affecting as well as the territorial extent of Mughal Empire. It was also affecting the strength and vitality at the center. Both were getting affected at the same time. Okay, and this nobility was also making alliances for getting better Jagirs. Okay, so there was competition within the nobility. Because of all these aspects, this nobility was now serving itself rather than the empire. Is it clear? It started serving itself. That was the main aspect. Okay, so they were living extravagant life. They became opportunistic. Okay, factionalism started. All right, like Sir Jaduna Sarkar has commented, no Mughal noble family retained its importance for more than 1 or 2 generations. If achievement of a noble were to mention in 3 pages, the achievement of his son, etc., nothing worthy be recorded here. So they are saying no fruitful importance can be given to them. All right. Now, if we have to come up with a counter view within this opinion, so you need to understand, one of the opinion is there were no capable nobles. So that was not the problem. There were capable nobles, but these nobles were trying to serve themselves or trying to create their own dynasty rather than serving the Mughal Empire. Okay, इस opinion को कभी सब्सक्राइब मत करना कि देवर नो competent nobles. There were competent nobles. All those who created their own state, they were competent, right? That's why they were able to create it. The only problem was now either they were getting affected by the alliance system. Like जब सैयद ब्रदर्स ने बहुत ज्यादा इम्पैक्ट करना स्टार्ट कर दिया था कोर्ट को, निजामुल said I should go towards south. I should retire to Deccan and मैं अपना कुछ और बना लेता हूँ, मैं यहाँ पे नहीं रह पाऊंगा. Because this factionalism, many of them they got disheartened or dispirited towards the Mughal empire and they started going towards their own respective regional empire. Okay. Next we can see deterioration and demoralization of the Mughal army. This question came in 2018. How the Mughal army was getting affected. Okay. So why army was getting demoralized? We see repeated invasions. Battle of Karnal. Okay, if you have emperor like Muhammad Shah Rangila, don't you think the whole institution of military setup will feel dissatisfied? In 1739, there was no person to lead this army. That's why they lost in 1739. All right. Then repeated invasions. Large number of invasions were done by Ahmad Shah Abdali. He did around 8-9 invasions. 1761 was the one in which Maratha got defeated, but before this and after that also, there were large number of invasions in the border areas. This was also affecting the strength of army. Okay. And the character of the people who were leading the army was also deteriorating. It was not like the previous Mughals. Okay. So because of all these factors, army was now becoming dissatisfied because they were repeatedly getting defeated. Okay. And there was no character left in the institution. So that's why Sir Wolseley Haig, he says demoralization of army was one of the principal factor of disintegration of the Mughal Empire. So here he talks about the laxity of discipline, no regular punishment for military crimes, etc. Okay. Then one viewpoint is intellectual bankruptcy. So here Jaduna Sarkari talks about no good education, no practical training of the Mughal mobility. So in some aspects we can even expect there was no central authority, no central institution we used to take care of bureaucracy. Like today you have institutions, in whichever services you go, there will be one cadre authority which takes care of you. Okay. If you go into IRS IT, you have Central Board of Direct Taxes. If you go to IS, DOPT, okay, they take care of there was no one to take care of the cadre system. This was one problem which was being faced by Mughals. Okay. Plus the overall education as well as the scientific system. The development of science was hampering. That's why intellectual bankruptcy. Where we were saying the scientific revolution in 17th century, 16th century in Europe, in India, we were not having any kind of scientific development which could be considered revolutionary. You see all the major development they came in there. अब न्यूटन बैठ के काम कर रहा है लॉ ऑफ ग्रेविटी पे, यहाँ हम बैठ के पेशकश करा रहे हैं. So there is a difference in those two. है ना. So scientific development became prominent in Europe, not in India. Last we can say large number of political problems, तो वो हमने वहीं पे डिवोट कर दिया था. Many of the agricultural crisis उसी का impact था, these revolts. Okay. So in conclusion, as we already know, there cannot be any one singular opinion. Okay. There cannot be any one singular opinion. There are multiple factors which are responsible for the downfall of such a large empire. Okay, so we cannot affix it to any one specific reason. Alright, but yes, all of them contributed to the decline of Mughals. So अगर किसी भी एक डिबेट पे क्वेश्चन आता है कि जागीरदारी क्राइसिस वाज रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर द डिक्लाइन ऑफ मुगल एम्पायर, so there you have to state not only jagirdari, we had agrarian crisis, we had demoralization of army also, intellectual bankruptcy also, all the factors were responsible. पहले जागीरदारी को evaluate करो अच्छे से and then write the other factors. Okay, so we cannot affix only one factor was responsible for the downfall of Mughals. उसको भी मेंशन कर सकते हो, रिलीजियस पॉलिसी उसमें दैट वीकन द सोशल बेस ऑफ द मुगल एम्पायर. Okay, but we should not enhance its outcome. What happens at times, this opinion was given by whom? Jagannath Sarkar. Aurangzeb was responsible for the downfall of Mughals. So we cannot affix everything on Aurangzeb. Okay, but yes, in general, his religious policy was responsible for the weakening of the base of Mughals.
राजाओं ने इतना
हाँ, तो वो भी मतलब फैक्टर्स और लग सकते. दीज वर द फैक्टर्स. राजपूत पॉलिसी पे इतना ज्यादा इम्पैक्ट नहीं पड़ेगा बिकॉज बाय दैट टाइम द सेंटर, द मेन फोकल पॉइंट ऑफ पावर, इट शिफ्टेड फ्रॉम राजपूत टुवर्ड्स डेक्कन. Okay, so that's why we cannot say, and the maximum percentage of Rajputs in the bureaucracy were during the reign of Aurangzeb. So we cannot consider it as a significant feature. Okay, यहाँ पे जो ज्यादा आपके टॉपिक थे वो डिबेट रिलेटेड थे. अगर अदर फैक्टर्स भी हैं तो अगर डाउनफॉल पे क्वेश्चन आएगा तो वो सब भी लिख देना. ठीक है. बहुत ज्यादा प्रिविलेंस नहीं था. दैट सिस्टम बिकेम प्रोमिनेंट अंडर इंग्लिश. ओके, तो उस चीज के ऊपर हम उतना ज्यादा स्ट्रेस नहीं करेंगे. Let's come to the next debate, which is linked to the downfall of Mughals also, that is rise of Marathas. Okay, so whenever there is a rise of Hindu dynasty, there is a debate, religion की वजह से हुआ है. Okay, because of religion, this is linked with Vijayanagar also, this is linked with Marathas also. Okay, so just have a read. There are different viewpoints which are given by some historians, so we need to evaluate them. कुछ वेरी इजी डिबेट्स भी हैं, जैसे कि हमारा टर्क्स रिलेटेड जो डिबेट्स हैं. व्हाई टर्क्स दे वर एबल टू कैप्चर नॉर्थ इंडिया, व्हाई दे वर एबल टू कैप्चर पावर. देयर आल्सो वी हैव लॉट्स ऑफ ओपिनियंस. वो हमने आपका आंसर राइटिंग सेशन में ही कवर कर लिया था. ओके, तो आंसर राइटिंग सेशन एक बार मिडिएवल इंडिया का एक बार जरूर देखना है दोबारा से, अगर नहीं देखा तो. देयर वी टॉक्ड अबाउट व्हाट, हाउ टू राइट इंट्रोडक्शन, हाउ टू राइट कंक्लूजन. सो दोज आंसर राइटिंग सेशंस आर इंपॉर्टेंट. यूट्यूब पे उसमें हिस्टोरियोग्राफी भी मेंशन किया था काफी टॉपिक्स पे. So those of you have not watched it, kindly watch it. Because majority of you who have written answers or papers, problem वही आ रही है सेम. इंट्रोडक्शन, हिस्टोरियोग्राफी, कंक्लूजन, उन्हीं सब में प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है. Geography was an important reason for the rise of Marathas. All of you know about this? So UPSC has asked this question multiple times. How do you see or how do you view the rise of Marathas in Deccan? Okay, so there you have to write the debate. कई बार ऐसा लगता है ना कि समझ भी नहीं आता इसमें debate लिखना है कि नहीं लिखना है. But in general, you need to include historiography, but it should be directly related to that answer. So here with the first perspective we have is Hindu reaction against the policies of Aurangzeb. Okay, it is given by Jaduna Sarkar, S.R. Sardesai and V.V. Joshi. So they are saying they were Aurangzeb was following anti-Hindu approach. That's why Marathas, it was a reaction. Then he says that Saint Ramdas guided him to become a orthodox Hindu. He took the titles like Hindava Dharmadharak and Gau Brahman Pratipalak. Okay, and eventually he used the title of Har Har Mahadev. So these are the arguments put in favor of this viewpoint. But in counter we see, if we see the rule of Shahji as well as Shivaji. So their rule started even before the coming of the Aurangzeb. He came during which period? 1656 के आसपास आए, ठीक है ना? 1658. So even before that time period we see the Marathas, the early Maratha period. Even though the declaration of Swarajya happened in 1674. But if we see the rise of Shahji, it happened even before the coming of Aurangzeb. Okay, so there is a chronological error in this viewpoint. Second, if we say when there were fight between these Hindu dynasties, Nayakas, etc., so there was even destruction of temples. It was not so that was necessarily against any Islamic force. Okay, then the naval chief of Marathas, they were Muslims. Okay, there was no alliance system with the other Hindu powers also like Rajputs. And last, if we see Ramdas, so Ramdas, Shivaji did not meet Ramdas during the later part of his life. So we cannot say that Ramdas was significantly the Chanakya behind the rise of Marathas. Okay, so this is the first viewpoint. Second, they talk about it was a national struggle for independence, but it was more of we do not accept the forms of nationalism because before the beginning of 19th century. So this viewpoint is probably we do not accept it. Okay, like they say use of guerrilla warfare, Maharashtra Dharma. Maharashtra Dharma is nothing but the form of Bhakti movement. It's the form of Bhakti movement in Maharashtra. Okay, so if we come up with the counter perspective, so there was no nationalist consciousness of the modern form. All right, there was no such discipline among the Marathas. P.V. Ranade say it is difficult to link Maharashtra Dharma with the rise of Marathas. All right, and even as if we see Satish Chandra, so he says in a nationalism there is a primal condition of the role of middle class. So we do not see any role of middle class among the Marathas. Then the next viewpoint is that Mughal expansion in the Deccan led to the rise of Marathas. This could be considered as one of the plausible reasons because it affected the fortunes of Marathas in that region. Then comes the other various factors. Okay, like the Varna system was not that much entrenched. So that's why there was an element of mobility in Maratha society. Okay, Maharashtra Dharma also it provided the ideological justification. Geography was very important. Geography was very important because Marathas, whichever part they were living, since they were living in a land which was not that much fertile specifically, so resources were less. Okay, that's why the class distinctions were less, and they developed a very kind of, you can say, high-handed attitude because of that. Okay, अभी भी जाओगे ना तो मराठा मूवीज में क्या डायलॉग चलता है, मराठा मरता है या मारता है. Why this viewpoint? Because they have lived in a very tough geographical terrain. Okay, that's why that hardened attitude comes from that itself, because these people have to work very hard to sustain themselves. That's why geography remained an important element. Geography kind of, you can say was one of the binding factors among the Marathas. Geography. Okay, but geography also became a reason for decline of Marathas later on. You know why? Because of their geographical terrain, they got skilled in guerrilla warfare tactics, but they could not become skilled in the plain or the face-to-face fights. Okay, so these are the various factors. So in conclusion, we can say it was not religion or nationalism, but political, social, cultural, economic factor was responsible for the rise of Marathas. Marathas, they got help from the Deccan states because these Deccan states were declining during that time period. All right, and they also got help from the other contemporary powers. Okay. So majority of the factors should be in social economic rather than कोई एक reaction था. All right. Now let us see one topic of art and architecture. Let us see just the first topic, Sultanate architecture. So UPSC is asking question either Sultanate, Mughals or the regional. तो आपको पढ़ना है, but your answer should be comprehensive. Okay. We created structure of art and architecture in the answer writing classes. So एक बार वो 4 answer writing classes आपको देखनी चाहिए. If you have not seen them, they are available on YouTube. Ancient, medieval, modern, and world for all 4. So let us see very quickly. So we have various dynasties. Okay. So first dynasty we have is Mamluk dynasty. So one of the earliest one was Quwaitul Islam mosque. Okay, so this was captured by Qutbuddin Aibak and he constructed a mosque. And this was built from the wreckage of various temples of Hindu as well as Jainas. Okay. So if we see the lintels, carved columns, slabs, they were just by turning the carved sides inwards. Alright. And they employed various artisans which were Indian in character. So the initial arches, there are 2 types of arches. Corbelled arch and true arch. Okay, in corbelled arch, when they create structure, यहाँ ऊपर एक रख देते हैं, then this is known as corbelled arch. Okay, in true arch, they use it. This becomes true arch. All right. So this is the difference. So initial structure they were having corbelled arch. All right. If we see the fundamental differences in the architecture of ancient India and medieval India. So here they were shift towards arch, dome and minaret. Here we were dependent upon column, pillars. ठीक है, बहुत ही सिंपल स्ट्रक्चर था ना टेम्पल्स का हमारा, ठीक है, ऑफ एंशिएंट इंडिया. बट हियर वी डिपेंडेड अपॉन आर्च, डोम्स एंड minarets. Okay, so this form of architecture is known as trabeate and this is known as arcuate. I'm telling you all this terminology because you need to use these keywords in your answers. So let us see the second last point. So Qutub Minar, 2.5 दिन का झोपड़ा, Iltutmish tomb. So in this they tried to discard the features of Hindu architecture. Okay. So remember the evolution. UPSC at times asks about the evolution. What kind of evolution was there? What kind of decoration was there? So this is, we are talking about the evolution. Okay. So they discarded them, but the arch still remained corbelled arch. Okay, they could not use the true arch, but decoration almost fully Islamic in detail. And as all of us remember, in Islamic we cannot use the images of live people. Okay ना? So they उनका decoration है वो थोड़ा different रहता है, वो हम बाद में discuss कर लेंगे. So the first time they used the true arch in the tomb of Balban. In Balban's tomb we see the use of true arch for the first time. So from this time itself we see a certain development of architecture. Okay, so by the end of the Mamluk dynasty they started going towards the Indo-Islamic architecture was getting more or less finalized. What would be the elements? जहाँ पे they started going towards the true arch, okay, as well as the method of creation. that also became arcuate. Is it clear? So there was certain evolution. Now see the Khaljis. So under Khilji there was change in style. They started using this Seljuk architecture tradition. Okay, employment of true arch, point, horseshoe in shape. This was a shape. Emergence of true dome. Okay, in Alai Darwaja we see the use of true dome for the first time. Okay, Alai Darwaja. Use of red sandstone, decorative marble relief were used by them. Appearance of lotus bird fringe on the underside of the arch. This was also being used. Okay, they also started using calligraphy, geometry, arabesque, which was bolder and more profuse. Then we see the Tughlaqs. So under Tughlaqs, stone rubble was the principal building material. Okay, they started also using the battering effect. जो monuments है उसमें थोड़ा सा sloping करने लग गए. That's why this effect is known as battering effect. So this was used under the Tughlaqs. So walls and bastions were invariably battered, the effect being most marked at the corners. Okay. They also tried certain new shape of arches like four-centered arch were used by them. Okay. Emergence of pointed dome. So emergence of pointed dome was a significant features. Clearly visible neck in contrast with the rather stifled dome of the preceding style. So from stifled towards the pointing dome. Okay, use of encaustic tiles in the decoration during this period, and we also see the development of octagonal plan. Octagonal types of tombs could be seen during this period. Okay, which was later perfected by Mughals. And if we see the overall decoration, so ornamentation was less. That's why the architectures of Tughlaq is considered utilitarian. Structures जो हैं वो थोड़े छोटे हैं. Okay. Post Tughlaq, we can see large number of two separate forms of distinguish. In mausoleums, we find octagonal plan. Within this octagonal plan, we used to have main chambers with veranda, one-story high structures, and veranda with projecting eaves supporting on bracket. Okay, and the second was square plan, where we were not having the verandas. All right, and two and sometimes three-story exterior and absence of eaves. So these were the 2 points which started during the post Tughlaq phase. All of you know about Lodhis. So Lodhis started double dome. Double dome was started by Lodhis. तो वो mention कर लो, इसमें mention नहीं है. Okay, double dome was started by them, as well as the concept of garden. Lodhi garden दिल्ली में, ठीक है. Concept of gardens. Gardens के अंदर monuments बनाना, so that to enhance the overall aesthetic sense. स्टार्ट किया हुआ मेन मेजर स्केल पे, मेजर स्केल ओनली अंडर लोधीस. ओके, सो ये सब डिटेल याद कर लो. नेक्स्ट वी कम टू द इनोवेशन. किस टाइप की इनोवेशन इन्होंने स्टार्ट करी है. तो आर्चेस वी हैव ऑलरेडी डिस्कस. ठीक है, इनिशियली जो इट वाज कोरबेल्ड आर्च, फ्रॉम दैट इन बलबन्स टूम वी सी द बिगिनिंग ऑफ ट्रू आर्च. वहां से इफ वी गो टुवर्ड्स खिलजीस, दे केम अप विद द हॉर्सशू शेप बनाने लग गए थे. अंडर Tughlaqs, we see the development of four-centered as well as different forms of arch. Okay. फिर pointed arch जो था, which was due to stability in the architectures. If we see the domes में we can see use of squinches as well as different kinds of pendatives. देखो कुछ मेन चीज जो हमारी आर्किटेक्चर में होती है, यू हैव टू रिमेंबर द टेक्निकल टर्म्स. नहीं तो आप और मैं लास्ट में लिख के आएंगे आर्चेस, डोम्स एंड मिनारेट्स. ओके, दैट वुड बी योर आंसर. सो यू नीड टू रिमेंबर सर्टेन टेक्निकल टर्म्स, चाहे बेसिक से समझ भी ना आए, बिकॉज दिस इज आर्किटेक्चर. आर्किटेक्चर एक सब्जेक्ट है. यू एंड मी वी डू नॉट अंडरस्टैंड आर्किटेक्चर. दैट इज क्लियर. हमें बहुत बेसिक चीजें पता होती है. ठीक है, ये फिल्म है, ये पिलर है, ये कॉलम है, एक्सेट्रा. कुछ टेक्निकल टीम जो वर्ड है उसको याद करना है. दैट इज अ चैलेंज, आई नो, बट यू नीड टू रिमेंबर इट बिकॉज टॉपिक बहुत ही लिमिटेड है. इफ यू कैन रिमेंबर दैट, हमारे मार्क्स ज्यादा आएंगे. इज दैट क्लियर? तो इसके ऊपर तो रट्टाफिकेशन होना ही चाहिए. दिस इज अ कोर डिमांड. ऑलराइट, देन इफ यू कम टू द कंस्ट्रक्शन मटेरियल, So they use quarried material, okay, all right. Rough and small rubbles also they use. Khilji period में new method of stone masonry. All of you know that they started using header and stretchers. So this was the method of stone masonry which was used under the Khiljis. Okay, this provided more stability to the building. Okay. And if we see the overall, lime mortar was the basic cementing material and gypsum was for use for plastering. So this was the overall construction material. Okay. Then if we see the decorative innovations, geometrical shapes were used, various motifs, repetition, symmetry, all right, foliation. This was also a dominant form of decoration. This was used for providing three-dimensional effect. Calligraphy, various verses of Qurans, okay, they were mentioned. All right. So this is how we see evolution also, construction material also, and eventually the decoration. Okay. So Sultanate architecture you can revise today itself और इसको एक आंसर राइटिंग में प्रैक्टिस कर लेना घर जाके, ठीक है. यूपीएससी नॉर्मली क्वेश्चन पूछेगा आपसे या तो सल्तनत से आएगा या इफ इट फ्रॉम मुगल इंडिया. If they'll make it difficult for you, then they'll ask for regional architecture. Is it clear? तीन ही तरीके के आर्किटेक्चर हैं, या तो अपना दिल्ली सल्तनत, मुगल्स, और इट विल कम टू रीजनल. टुडे वी हैव कंप्लीटेड सल्तनत, टुमारो विल कंप्लीट मुगल्स. तो क्लास के साथ साथ में हम एक एक दिन थोड़ा थोड़ा एक एक टॉपिक करने लग जाएंगे. So that will become easy for all of us. Okay. So that's it for today.